Hi, my name is Jenny Feick. Welcome to the 8th in a series of educational video webinars for the GDTA. This is the 4th of 4 videos on the fauna or animals of the Great Divide, and this one focuses on a class of vertebrates called the mammals. And let's just get rid of some of these controls at the bottom. And H. Oh, that's not getting rid of them. Okay, let's try something else here. There we go. Good. Just before I begin, a brief land acknowledgement. The Great Divide Trail Association is committed to reconciliation, which starts by taking this and every opportunity to acknowledge our honor and privilege to work and play within Treaty 7 territory. We honor and acknowledge that the GDT passes through traditional Indigenous territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Yayahe Nakota, the Tsuut'ina, the Cree, the Shuiapma, the Clay Dene, the Tanaha, the Sinixt, and Métis. The Great Divide Trail Association would like to invite you to advocate for what you love and to preserve nature for future generations to enjoy while educating yourselves and others on Indigenous history and perspectives. This video is the 8th in a series of natural history-oriented presentations called The Nature of the Great Divide. This Nature of the Great Divide talk focuses on some of the vertebrate animals you could encounter along the Great Divide Trail, specifically the mammals. Before I begin the actual educational part of the talk, I'll share a bit about my background. I have a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Biology with a minor in Physical Geography, a Master's in Environmental Science, and a PhD in Natural Resources Geography, all from the University of Calgary. During my 25-year coast-to-coast career with Parks Canada, I worked as a park naturalist in Mount Revelstoke National Park, and Glacier National Park, Waterton Lakes, and Kootenay National Park, and then other positions in Banff and Yoho and the Western Regional Office in planning, research, and management in Western and Atlantic regions. From 2000 until 2012, I managed various programs for the British Columbia Provincial Ministry of Environment, including habitat protection, terrestrial ecosystem science, stewardship outreach, climate change and adaptation for nature, and environmental policy. I retired from full-time government work in 2012. My husband, wildlife biologist Ian Hatter, and I now live in Invermere, British Columbia, where we moved from Victoria, BC, and we're much closer to the Great Divide Trail now. In terms of my connection with the GDT and the GDTA, I was one of the so-called Original Six on the Project Great Divide Trails crew in 1974, and we surveyed the route between Waterton Lakes and Banff National Parks. I was one of the founders of the first Great Divide Trail Association, a past board member for several years, and a past president for one term. I have hiked a lot of the GDT in sections over the years, although not anything north of the Wilmore Wilderness Park yet. When the GDTA was resurrected in 2013, I rejoined and started volunteering on trail work parties and also writing articles for the GDTA's Pathfinder newsletter. In addition, I am the compiler and editor of both editions of Tales from the Great Divide, vignettes on the origins and early history of Canada's Great Divide Trail and the Great Divide Trail Association. This is a self-published compendium of stories from individuals involved firsthand in the start and development of the GDT and the GDTA. Here is what I will cover in this talk. I'll outline where vertebrates, especially the mammals, fit within the hierarchy of life biodiversity, and the animal kingdom, where mammals live in the vicinity of the Great Divide, as well as their ecological roles. I'll also talk about the specifics on what mammals you could see when you're hiking along the Great Divide Trail, and finish up with a few tips on safeguarding nature along the GDT, particularly in terms of dealing with mammals. Going back to the hierarchy of life diagram that I've shown in the preceding videos in this series, this is the fourth video where I discuss members of the animal kingdom, the fauna that live in the vicinity of the Great Divide. When one considers the diversity of life on Earth, its biodiversity, vertebrates are what we usually think of. Yet, taken as a whole, vertebrates constitute just 3 to 5% of all animal species, and mammals comprise just 9% of vertebrate species and only 0.3% of all known animal species. While the majority of animal species on the planet are classified as invertebrates, animals without backbones, we tend to be most familiar with the creatures with backbones, the vertebrates. All vertebrates have a spinal column comprised of vertebrae containing the spinal cord or nerve. Within the vertebrates, there are jawless fishes, as well as the vertebrates with jaws, including cartilaginous fishes, bony fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. In this video, I focus on the mammals. As I mentioned in previous videos, in the vicinity of the Great Divide, altitude creates 3 major vegetation zones. Animals, including most mammals, have the advantage of being able to move across these different zones. Nevertheless, you will encounter different mammal species at different elevations. Due to the harsher weather conditions up high, it gets increasingly difficult for mammals to survive the higher up the mountain you go. The most species tend to live in the valleys and on the lower slopes of the montane zone. Fewer species are found in the subalpine forest zone, and the fewest species survive in the alpine zone. Timing is everything. Several mammal species live high up in the Rocky Mountains from spring until late summer or early autumn, but then either migrate down to the mountain valleys for the winter or hibernate. Very few can tough it out during the harsh conditions of a Great Divide winter. In the Rockies, you will be more likely to see ground squirrels during the heat of the day, whereas in the spring and summer, most mammal activity will be most pronounced at dawn and at dusk. Bats emerge at dusk and are active at night, heading back to their roosts at dawn. Mammals can be found in all of the major ecosystems of the Canadian Rockies, although it's unlikely to encounter them if you are traveling on glaciers or major ice fields or spelunking inside very deep caves. Most are found in the vicinity of the Great Divide, although some are more restricted to major valleys some distance from the Great Divide Trail, especially during the late fall, winter, and early spring. The majority of the terrestrial habitats within the Great Divide area host mammals. Numerous mammal species live primarily in the valley bottom montane forest zone. Many frequent the subalpine forest zone, and several make their home in the alpine zone. Some easily travel between habitats, while others have a more restricted range and stay within a small defined territory. Mammals, in particular hoofed mammals, seek highly mineralized soil deposits known as natural salt licks to supplement their mostly vegetarian diet. Unfortunately, Some get fatally attracted to roadsides by the salty solution highway crews put on the roads to prevent icy driving conditions. Only a few mammals found in the Canadian Rockies are aquatic or semi-aquatic. However, all mammals need to drink water and thus seek out aquatic habitats at some point. There is another reason that certain mammals seek out aquatic habitats. Moose seek shallow lakes, ponds, and wetlands where they not only cool off, but can also feed on aquatic plants. That's because emergent and submerged aquatic plants produce an average of 4 times more nutrition than terrestrial plants. Moose need sodium. While their typical woody plant diet of leaves, twigs, and buds provides some sodium, aquatic plants are more digestible and have higher concentrations of sodium and other beneficial minerals. Keep an eye out for moose whenever you approach aquatic habitats along the GDT, especially north of Jasper. Ian and I have watched white-tailed deer do the same thing as moose, deliberately seeking out and eating rushes and other aquatic vegetation, presumably for the higher mineral content and their digestibility. Some mammals in the Canadian Rockies depend on snow for cover, living mostly under the snow in winter. Others change their summer brown coats to winter white for camouflage. Several mammal species have great adaptations for snow and life on the snow. The lynx's big feet allow it to travel on the snow, and the long legs of the moose allow it to continue browsing throughout the winter, even if the snow gets really deep. With freeze-thaw cycles replacing consistently cold, snowy winters and earlier, drier springs due to climate change, many snowshoe hares are experiencing a mismatch in when they molt their winter coats and grow in their summer brown pelage. The hares depend on environmental cues such as temperature, snow depth, and day length to initiate molting, and the molting process takes a full month. If a sudden thaw in March eliminates the snow cover when they are still white, they become extremely vulnerable to predators, even when they choose dawn and dusk as times to feed. Their primary predator, the Canada lynx, might do okay for a while, but once the snowshoe hare population plummets, the lynx population declines quickly as well. When populations of a keystone species like the snowshoe hare decrease, it affects the entire ecosystem. Besides the snowshoe hare and its predators, climate change is also adversely affecting other iconic mammals of the Great Divide: American pika, mountain goat, woodland caribou, mountain goat, and moose are adapted to living in cold climates and suffer from heat stress. Mammals play key roles in ecosystem processes, including complex food web dynamics, connecting various species of mammals with other vertebrate animals, invertebrates, fungi, plants, protists, bacteria, and archaeans. Plants and blue-green algae, the organisms that can take sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water and manufacture food through photosynthesis, form the foundation of the food web. They are the primary producers. They are the primary producers. The next trophic level is comprised of the primary consumers, the herbivores, organisms that eat plants. The subsequent trophic levels, the secondary and tertiary consumers, are carnivores, which eat other animals. Predator-prey relationships are a key part of the food web in the Rocky Mountains. Carnivores like wolves prey on herbivores like elk. When hiking on the GDT, One must be alert and willing to reroute around and avoid any area where a carcass is still being consumed and defended by a wolf pack, cougar, or bear. A phenomenon called a trophic cascade occurs when a predator reduces the abundance or changes the activity of its prey, thereby allowing species in the next trophic level to increase in number. These indirect effects can trickle down or cascade to many lower levels of the food chain. The removal of the top predator can alter the food web dynamics. The primary consumers overpopulate and exploit the primary producers. Eventually, not enough primary producers remain to sustain the consumer population. Top-down food web stability depends on competition and predation in the higher trophic levels. This happened in the southern Canadian Rockies when predator control programs eliminated wolves in the vicinity of the Great Divide south of Jasper by 1950. Elk populations skyrocketed. Elk consumed record numbers of aspen seedlings and saplings and other vegetation. For several winters, elk even ate the bark of mature aspens. You can still see the effects of this herbivory in the remaining aspen forests in the montane zone on the eastern slopes. Once wolves were no longer persecuted, they moved back into the vicinity of the Great Divide from north to south, beginning in 1979. There is a story about the return of timber wolves to the Lost Creek headwaters along the GDT in Chapter 4 of Tales from the Great Divide. Predator-prey dynamics do not just affect the predator and its prey. There are ripple effects on other organisms throughout the whole ecosystem, as well as on the soil. Besides their decomposing bodies, all mammals in the vicinity of the Great Divide contribute to the organic matter in the poor mineral soil of the Rockies through their droppings or scat. To obtain much needed calcium, rodents gnaw on shed antlers and the bones left over after other animals have dined on a carcass. Nothing is wasted. Besides contributing organic matter and minerals to the soil, many Rocky Mountain mammals contribute significantly to aeration and turnover of the soil through their digging activities. Grizzly bears excavate to obtain the corms of glacier lilies, as well as to get ground squirrels. Ground squirrels dig up a lot of soil to build their multi-chambered dens. Northern pocket gophers live underground all year round. A pocket gopher's mouth closes behind ever-growing, gnawing teeth, enabling it to harvest underground vegetation and to excavate a network of tunnels in mountain meadows without ever eating dirt. Many mammals have symbiotic relationships with other species in the same habitats. Mutualism occurs when relationships are mutually beneficial. Black-billed magpies have been observed removing and eating ticks off of elk. In the previous video, which included birds of the Great Divide area, I spoke about the relationship between wolves and common ravens. Mammals host parasites, usually invertebrates such as fleas, and also ticks and mites, as well as protists and bacteria. They can also transmit many viruses. Deer mice can transmit the potentially fatal pentavirus. Ungulates can also contain tapeworm parasites that cause more harm to the predators that eat them than they do to the ungulate. Sometimes mammals, including humans, unwittingly transport parasites that have negative effects on other species, as in the case of the protist that causes whirling disease in fish. Unlike elsewhere, bats that live in the Canadian Rockies do not pollinate wildflowers. However, bears, Columbian ground squirrels, and other mammals that consume seeds and/or fruits containing seeds assist with seed dispersal for plants. Rodents that do not hibernate in the winter, such as chipmunks and golden mantled ground squirrels, that both cache seeds to eat later, are especially important. The ecological and evolutionary interactions between American red squirrels and coniferous trees in the montane and subalpine forest zones have affected their morphology as well as their foraging and social behavior. These tree-dwelling squirrels are deliberate seed predators and inadvertent seed dispersers. They also spread the spores of beneficial fungi that enable trees to gain nutrients for their growth. In fire-adapted ecosystems, American red squirrels exhibit larger body mass, stronger jaw muscles, and a more robust lower jaw, adaptations necessary for harvesting and opening the hard resinous cones produced by lodgepole pine and ponderosa pine. American red squirrels remove large quantities of cones just prior to cone opening for the purpose of larder hoarding for upcoming periods of food scarcity during winter. In video number 3, I spoke about the coniferous trees' strategy of massed years, where they produce more cones than the squirrels can possibly harvest. Studies have shown that in the intervening years, when fewer cones are produced, the cones tend to be longer with smaller seeds, and they tend to be less numerous near where there are squirrel cone caches or middens, and shorter with bigger seeds and more numerous on conifers that are further away from the caches. Scientific studies demonstrate that the seeds of the fruit of Canada buffalo berry, Saskatoon, and huckleberry bushes are more likely to germinate if they pass through the short digestive tract of a bear, because the process removes the pulp from the seeds. Also, where grizzly bears till the soil in an attempt to dig up and eat the corms of glacier lilies, these plants become more prolific and productive. Beavers are considered ecological engineers because of their tree cutting and dam building activities, which hold back water in beaver ponds and create and sustain wetlands. Beavers keep Rocky Mountain Valley ecosystems healthy and help manage water-related issues. They create wetland habitat that benefits other species and increases biodiversity. They improve water quality by reducing erosion and retaining sediment. Their dammed ponds store water during droughts, minimize the overall watershed level flood risk, and mitigate flooding peaks downstream. A great book to read on the ecological and cultural roles beavers play in Canada is Once They Were Hats, In Search of the Mighty Beaver by Frances Backhouse. Supporting the beaver's role in water stewardship will help nature adapt to climate change. There are over 50 species of mammals that you have the potential to see while on the GDT. These include various types of carnivores, ungulates, lagomorphs, rodents, insectivores, and mephitids. I will spend the rest of the talk telling you about these different species. The order Carnivora, which means meat eater, is comprised of several families of mammals, including ursids, canids, felines, mustelids, and mephitids. The Canadian Rockies, and in particular the Great Divide area, is one of the last places in North America where all the once more widespread native species of carnivores and their prey persist. Carnivore is a bit of a misnomer in the case of ursids or bears, which are omnivorous, meaning they eat all manner of things, not just meat. In fact, in the Rockies, the majority of their diet is vegetarian. There are 2 species of bears that you could see along the GDT, the grizzly bear and the black bear. Here is a picture of Boo, the grizzly at Kicking Horse Resort in Golden, and a black bear by the side of the road going up to Kicking Horse Resort. You can see Boo has a more pronounced hump behind his head, resulting from the size and strength of his shoulder muscles, which help him to dig. Black bears have a smoother, rounder back profile. Grizzlies also have a large round head and a concave or dish-shaped face with small round ears and a short snout. Black bears have a smaller head, longer pointy ears, and a more narrow, elongated snout. When you look at a black bear from the side, its head and snout form a straight line, not the concave dish shape of a grizzly bear. Black bears come in various color phases: black, brown, cinnamon, and even a rare bluish white phase. Grizzlies are dark to light brown with a sprinkling of lighter colored hairs over their upper body, giving them the so-called grizzled appearance. What you cannot see in this picture are the large, long claws on the grizzly bear's paws. If you saw this bear, would you say it is a grizzly or a black bear? It's a grizzly. This is a picture of bear M1222, nicknamed the Boss, near the Great Divide in Kootenay National Park in 2013. The Boss is one of the most well-known bears in the Rocky Mountain National Parks and has a massive territory in the vicinity of the Great Divide near Lake Louise. He has successfully fathered more cubs than any other male bear studied in these parks. He has been a successful forager and hunter, bringing down animals as large as elk. He has been very aggressive towards black bears and other grizzlies, but so far, as of 2024, he has not had any conflicts with people, largely because he came of age during an era when visitors had been educated to not feed bears or inadvertently attract them by leaving food and other scented products accessible in their campsites. Even if you do not see bears while hiking the GDT, you will know you are visiting bear country by the multitude of signs they leave. You can tell if a bear has been in the area recently by how fresh their scat looks. You can figure out what they have been eating by examining that scat. Bear tracks display 5 toes. Grizzly bear tracks, like the ones pictured here that we saw on the GDT at Elk Pass, show prominent claw marks. Bears climb some trees, leaving marks. They claw certain other trees or rub their backs on them, again, leaving marks and often hair. You will probably see where grizzly bears have dug up alpine meadows in search of the corms of glacier lilies, the roots of yellow sweetvetch, or Columbian ground squirrels. Sometimes meadows look like they've been rototilled. Be on your guard in these areas and be sure to make noise so the bears know you are there. The bears dig up and leave the glacier lily corms to bake in the sun in order to make them more digestible. So if there are glacier lily corms lying about, the bear is likely still close by. It is less probable, but not impossible, for you to find an abandoned bear den in a south or west facing slope, or in the case of black bears, even in a large tree. Investigate it if it is summertime, but do not linger if you find a den in the early spring or late fall, as bears sometimes return to the same den to reuse it. If you see one of the 3 species of wild felines along the GDT, count yourself very lucky. It is rare to observe any of these secretive creatures. You are more likely to see cougars wherever mule deer are plentiful. I've seen bobcat right on the GDT in the High Rock section. North of there in Kananaskis country, I have seen the Canada lynx. You are much more likely to see their tracks. Like all cats, they hide and try to cover their scat. It is possible to see wild canids while hiking on the GDT, probably more so than the felines. The three species you could see are the Rocky Mountain timber wolf or gray wolf, the coyote, and the red fox, which is not always red, but occurs in several color phases, including silver, gray, dark brown, and black. More likely, you will hear these creatures. In particular, you may hear wolves howl at night. Wolves do not tolerate coyotes in their territory, so if you hear wolves, you likely will not hear the yipping of coyotes. Likewise, coyotes will kill any red foxes in their territory, whereas wolves tolerate red foxes. Foxes tend to be quite quiet and secretive in the Rockies. Wild canids readily leave their scat behind, and you can differentiate it from dog scat by the amount of hair and bone fragments that you can find in it. It can be tricky to differentiate the print of a wolf from a large dog, or that of a coyote from a large dog or small immature adult wolf. By the way, do not pick up canid scats when you're examining them, as they may contain the eggs of a tapeworm parasite that causes hydatid disease, a serious and potentially fatal condition for humans involving cysts in your lungs and liver. You can distinguish whether you are looking at a wild canid or a wild feline species from their tracks. In both cases, you can see 4 toes, but with the canids, you see claw marks, and you can draw an X between the pads. You cannot see claw marks on feline tracks as they sheath their claws, and there's a more circular shape to the track. These ones on the right are lynx tracks, and lynx tracks in deep snow display this typical ice cream cone shape. Identifying tracks can be very challenging. The track on the right has claw marks and was quite large, and we decided that it must be that of a wolf. However, the ones on the left could be bobcat or coyote based on their size. These tracks were seen along the High Rock Trail part of the Great Divide Trail. Here is a more obvious bobcat track. Mustelids, members of the weasel family that you might see, include the ones pictured here, the short-tailed weasel and the long-tailed weasel, as well as the pine marten and the wolverine. All weasels are sleek and savage predators. They also engage in play. In 1975, fellow GDTA volunteer Dave Higgins and I were hiking in a subalpine area in Waterton Lakes National Park, Alberta. We saw a medium-sized, furry brown animal run up to the top of a patch of snow on an avalanche slope and then slide down. Then it dashed up to the top again and slid down. It did this over and over. It resembled what we thought a wolverine looked like, but because of its behavior, we concluded it must be a river otter, which are known to playfully slide down slopes. We couldn't imagine the fierce wolverine at play. Then the wind changed. It caught our scent and ran away. We walked over to the slope where it had been, and the tracks were those of a wolverine. Near aquatic habitats in the montane zone, you might be fortunate enough to see an American mink in hot pursuit of a fish dinner or other prey. Or you might catch a glimpse of a North American river otter, an apex predator in aquatic environments in the montane zone. More likely, you will stumble across one of their latrines filled with fish bones, scales, and any other undigestible hard bits from their aquatic prey. Otter latrines are social hubs for otters, especially the males, who habitually meet and hang out together as they urinate and defecate in these designated locations. There is only a remote possibility of seeing the secretive fisher in the coniferous forest north of Jasper, or a badger near the Crow's Nest Pass or Old Fort Point in Jasper National Park. Both species are in the Rocky Mountain ecosystem, but are extremely rare. Both are listed as species at risk in Canada's Species at Risk Act. Usually, I think of a badger at dawn or dusk in grassy areas in the montane zone where there are a lot of Columbian ground squirrels, their primary prey. However, while Ian and I were having lunch during a hike in Waterton Lakes National Park, we saw this American badger crossing a pass near Lakeview Ridge. He went right by us without a sideways glance. He was on a mission. Mustelids are extremely secretive, and you are more likely to see their tracks. Weasels display a characteristic 2x2 pattern when they walk and a 3x3 pattern when they run. Wolverine tracks are found in the valley bottoms and forests, but are most easily seen above tree line. Wolverines usually travel in a straight line, sometimes for many kilometers, whereas pine martens and other weasels meander. When the snow is deep, you don't see the toe prints, but if the snow is shallow, you will notice that there are 5 toes, not 4, as with felines and canids. A wolverine's paw is 8 to 10 centimeters across, whereas pine marten tracks are half the size of wolverine tracks. Weasel scat is usually placed routinely and prominently on top of logs, roots, or rocks, often right on the GDT. This one showed that the weasel ate not just meat, but also huckleberries. Pine marten scat is long, thin, coiled, and tapered in shape, and full of fur, bone, feathers, pieces of leaves, and grass. When defecating, martens wriggle their hips, resulting in twisted scat. Like other mustelid droppings, wolverine scat is twisted and tapered and may double back on itself in longer scats. Wolverine scat is white to light gray and dry when the carnivore consumes a lot of bones, and it looks similar to wolf scat when it eats fresh meat. So it looks more gray-brown in color, but it's much smaller in size than wolf scat. Skunks used to be classified within the weasel family, but DNA research shows they should be in their own family. Seeing a striped skunk while hiking on the GDT would be an extremely rare event, although possible in Waterton near the town site, or while traveling through the Crow's Nest Pass area, or when near Banff or Jaspertown sites. You are more likely to encounter the proverbial dead skunk in the middle of the road, stinking to high heaven, when driving to or from the GDT. Large mammals that you are more likely to see along the GDT will be the taxonomic group called the true ungulates, otherwise known as hoofed mammals. These include the cervids, or members of the deer family, as well as Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep and mountain goats, and plains bison. All hoofed mammals essentially walk on the tips of their toes. Their hooves provide a strong and sensitive surface to bear the weight of their bodies. A hoof is a hard, flexible covering that protects the toes of an ungulate. It is an adaptation for fast running to escape predators, enabling both speed and endurance. Hooves are sharp and can also be used defensively. They have the same evolutionary origin as the nails and claws of other mammals, all of which are made of the fibrous protein keratin. Hooves grow from the living cells at the base or attached end and continue to grow throughout an individual animal's life. Like nails and claws, their length is controlled by wear. While there are 5 members of the deer family living in the vicinity of the Great Divide, there are 2 species that are called deer. The one you are most likely to see is the mule deer. Here is a doe crossing the GDT along Upper Waterton Lake, Alberta, and a mule deer buck in his light summer coat below. The other species that you are less likely to see, except in the Crow's Nest Pass, is the white-tailed deer. Mule deer have black tips at the end of their tails, whereas white tails display their white flag tail when alarmed. The mule deer is also roughly 1/3 larger than the white-tailed deer. They are stockier, heavier, and wider in the chest than the average whitetail. They are, I guess the main distinguishing feature really of the mule deer is their large and prominent ears, which are similar to those of a mule. And here is a doe and a fawn drinking out of our bird bath at our house in Invermere, BC, which illustrate the big ears. The other species in the deer family that you will probably see along the GDT are the Rocky Mountain elk or wapiti, and perhaps the moose. These are large mammals that can be dangerous, especially the cows during the calving season in the spring and the bulls during the rut or breeding season in the autumn. They can deliver death blow kicks with their hooves if they feel threatened. Elk and moose have completely different lifestyles. Elk live in herds, which can be very large, whereas moose are solitary, except during the rut and when a cow is caring for her calf. In the deer family, only the males carry antlers. They shed them each fall after the rut and have to grow them anew each spring. Small buds begin growing between the buck's ears around April or May. As the antlers develop, they're covered by a nourishing coat of blood vessels, skin, and short hair known as velvet. This supplies nutrients and minerals to the growing bone. The antlers are very vulnerable to injury during this phase. When antlers reach their full size in late August or September, the velvet is no longer needed. The blood supply is cut off, and the buck rubs his antlers against trees and shrubs to remove this thin layer, leaving hard, shiny bone. Rodents are quick to devour this nutrient-rich resource once it's on the ground. Antlers reflect the age, nutrition, genetics, and overall fitness of an individual. Antlers are among the fastest growing tissues in the entire animal kingdom. They are an extension of the bone in the skull. Although they cost a lot in energy to grow, they are vital during the deer breeding season or rut. The shape of a deer track varies somewhat with the type of ground on which the animal walks. On soft soil, the toes are likely to be relatively more pointed. On hard, rocky ground, the hoofs are worn enough to produce blunt tips. Telling the difference between white-tailed deer and mule deer just from their tracks is nearly impossible. Moose and elk tracks are definitely larger than those of a deer. Moose and elk have somewhat similar tracks. Moose hooves have sharply pointed toes that point inward at the tips, giving the tracks elongated heart shapes. Elk hooves have rounded toes with each segment of the hoof parallel to each other, giving the track shapes that resemble the silhouette of a molar tooth. Since moose are heavier, the prints are often deeper. They also tend to be solitary and not in a herd like elk. So if you see a lot of large ungulate tracks, they are probably from elk, not moose. Sadly, the ungulate you're least likely to see along the GDT is the woodland caribou. Once common throughout the old growth montane forests, or mountain forests, as they're in both subalpine and the montane zone, their populations have declined dramatically due to habitat fragmentation, human disturbance, predation by wolves, and climate change. While it is still possible to see them in parts of Jasper National Park and north into Wilmore Wilderness Park, which is where I've seen them, and Kakwa Interprovincial Park, count yourself really, really lucky if you see one. Be sure to report your sightings to Parks Canada and/or provincial wildlife agencies. Even if you do not see any of the hoofed mammals, you will know they are around because you will undoubtedly observe their scat on the GDT or along the GDT. However, how do you know whose scat is that? Mule deer tend to make neat piles of small oblong pellets. Elk pellets are much larger, rounded with sharp edges. Moose pellets are the biggest and are smooth and oblong. They look like compacted sawdust in spring and fall when moose feed on woody stems. Caribou scat has jelly bean-sized pellets that are oval-shaped and dimpled. In summertime, when caribou eat leafy greens, these pellets clump together. Although mountain goats are seldom seen because of their preference for very rugged habitat, they are actually quite numerous in the vicinity of the GDT. They can be distinguished from bighorn sheep by their all-white coats, beards, and short black dagger-like horns. Notice that the horns of the billy goat above are jet black. Sorry about that. And they grow upwards and back in a uniform and consistently gradual curve, not down and around like the sheep. The coat of the mountain goat is all white compared to the short brown hair of the bighorn sheep. Bighorn sheep also have a white rump patch. Female mountain goats and bighorn sheep also have horns. A nanny's horns extend more vertically from the base than a billy's horns, and they have a more distinct curve near the tip. A nanny's horns are generally thinner than a billy's. Bighorn sheep ewes have slightly curved horns that taper to a sharp point and are around 30 centimeters long. The best way to distinguish a bighorn sheep lamb from a mountain goat kid is that the lambs are light brown or beige and the kids are white. Mom is usually close by to protect them from golden eagles and other predators. Rocky Mountain bighorn rams have massive, spirally curved brown horns, while ewes have short, spiky brown horns. The horns in general are different than antlers, the antlers that typify the males of most members of the deer family. Antlers are shed each year, as I mentioned, whereas horns are maintained all year round, with annual growth contributing to the length and girth of the horn. Horns are a two-part structure, as opposed to the simple one-piece structure of an antler. The interior portion of a horn is bone and is an extension of the skull, like the antler. That part then is covered by an exterior sheath grown by specialized hair follicles that are similar to what makes up human fingernails. So they really are incredible structures. And the bighorn, the spiral shape actually is a good design for withstanding stress and pressure and like percussive pressure, which if you've ever heard of the bighorn sheep rut, you know that they butt their heads together. And so without these shaped horns, these strong horns and their reinforced skull, they would have very serious concussions. They do get concussions, but not as serious as what we would get if we were to do the same thing. Bighorns are primarily grazers, and they migrate seasonally between low grassy slopes and alpine meadows. Escape terrain with rocky ledges is usually nearby. Bighorn sheep scat is in pellet form, which may be deposited singly or in clusters. The pellets may be strung out like this one here if the animal was walking, or they may lay in a group if the animal was standing. They vary in shape from a tiny apple seed to the large chocolate drop with attenuated tip and an indentation at the bottom. Mountain goats have varied diets that include browse, shrubs, lichens, grasses, and even the foliage on trees. Depending on the amount of moisture in the goat's diet, their droppings may vary from hard, dry pellets in the winter to a clustered mass of soft pellets in spring, summer, and early autumn. The shed winter coat of a mountain goat is soft and woolly, whereas that of the bighorn sheep shows distinct hairs. Bighorn sheep have elongated hooves that are easily confused with those of a deer. In general, the bighorn sheep prints have straighter edges and are less pointed than a deer's. They are more blocky and less heart-shaped. Mountain goat tracks are more rectangular than heart-shaped, with the hooves facing straight ahead in a similar fashion to bighorn sheep. To help them climb, mountain goats have toes that spread when they step, creating a distinctive V shape at the top of their print, unless they slip in the mud, like here. Quick quiz. Are these animals along the GDT in Waterton Lakes National Park, Alberta, mountain goat or bighorn sheep? And what about these two in Kootenay National Park, British Columbia? Well, there are wild bison in Banff National Park. You are unlikely to see them anywhere near the GDT. The bison in Waterton Lakes National Park are in an enclosure at the eastern edge of the park. So unless you visit the bison paddock on your way to or from the GDT, you won't see them. While the explorer, David Thompson, reported a bison pound near Howes Pass, as well as chasing a small herd of bison up and over Howes Pass into British Columbia, few bison ever frequented the Great Divide area. In the part of their range that included the Rocky Mountains, they tended to be more common on the eastern slopes and foothills. Rodents, the gnawing animals, mammals, are quite plentiful and diverse in the vicinity of the GDT. They tend to be the prey species that many of the carnivores rely on for survival. The rodents you are most likely to see clockwise from the upper left are the hoary marmot, the Columbian ground squirrel, one of the two species of chipmunk, least and yellow pine, and the golden mantled ground squirrel, which many people think is a chipmunk on steroids. The easiest way to tell these two species apart is that with the chipmunk, the stripes are on the head, above, below, and through the eye, whereas the stripes are only on the body of the golden mantled ground squirrel and not on the head. The hoary marmot is also called the whistler, and you will undoubtedly hear its piercing whistle before you see it sunning itself on a boulder or foraging for plants in the alpine zone. Marmots hibernate for 9 months of the year, so they have to make the most of their short time in the summer to eat enough to sustain them for their winter sleep, plus find a mate, breed, bear and raise their young, and then send them off to fend for themselves. Two other rodents that live in the Canadian Rockies are the northern pocket gopher and the bushy-tailed wood rat. It is highly unlikely you will see a northern pocket gopher, but you may see mounds of earth in low elevation meadows in the montane zone, particularly in the Crow's Nest Pass, which is evidence that they are around. Likewise, you probably won't see bushy-tailed wood rats, which are also called pack rats, but you may smell their sour odor if you get near one of their nests or dens, be it along a cliff edge like this one, in a cave, under a rock overhang, or in a backcountry shelter. You are sure to see many American red squirrels when you hike the GDT. They are omnivorous and enjoy a varied diet, including seeds, flowers, berries, fungi, insects, mice, eggs, and even small birds. In the vicinity of the Great Divide, their primary source of nutrition comes from the seeds of conifer cones. Red squirrels also snip off and dry mushrooms, placing them carefully on a branch or on the ground where sunlight and air will hasten the drying process. If you see a red squirrel frantically scurrying about in August or September, It's getting ready for the upcoming cold months by gathering and storing food for future consumption. In a frenzy of activity in late summer and fall, red squirrels climb trees, clip the ripe unopened conifer cones, and then climb back down to retrieve them, carrying them to their storage area or midden. Wildlife researchers have documented that a hard-working squirrel can clip and store up to 12,000 ripe unopened cones during this intense time. Red squirrels do not hibernate and are active during the winter, except for cold spells when they retreat into their dens and eat their cached food. Their hopping pattern, track pattern, is very distinctive, and they are usually never far from tree trunks. Northern flying squirrels are very secretive, nocturnal, and thus rarely seen. They prefer to live in old-growth coniferous forests, and there are likely many of them along the forested portions of the GDT. Flying squirrels do not actually fly. They glide down from branch to branch, a feat facilitated by their patagium, a thin fold of furry skin or membrane that connects their front and back legs. When they launch from a branch, their patagium catches the air and acts like a parachute or the wings of a glider. They steer by adjusting the tautness of this membrane and use their furry tail to stabilize their flight, a bit like the tail of a kite. They can glide as far as 90 meters and can make turns in the air on the way down, but they cannot soar on updrafts. As they reach their destination branch, they use their forelimbs to grab onto it and then quickly move to the other side of the tree to try to avoid detection by predators like owls or pine martens. Sadly, the only picture of a northern flying squirrel I have is of one that Ian and I found dead on a trail in the mountains north of Fernie, BC. Like red squirrels, flying squirrels are omnivorous. Canadian beavers are the largest rodents in the Rockies. They spend most of their time in aquatic environments. You are most likely to catch a glimpse of them swimming in mountain valley lakes in Jasper National Park. With their webbed hind feet and large, flat, nearly hairless tail that they use to smack the water to warn other beavers of impending danger, they are unmistakable. You may see evidence of beavers even if you don't see one. These could be lodges, cut trees, and or dams. It is even less likely that you will see a muskrat, a smaller aquatic rodent along the GDT. They tend to be in lower elevations than where the GDT is. In the winter, porcupines focus on eating the needles and inner bark of conifers, especially pine. You are much more likely to see these debarked conifers than you are to see an actual porcupine. Porcupines spend winters in the valley, where several may den together to stay warm. In the spring, they return up the mountainside to their summer feeding areas. This one was near a tree line above Lake Agnes in Banff National Park, Alberta, and the debarked lodgepole pines were up Tokum Creek in Kootenay National Park, BC, and between Lake Louise and Moraine Lake in Banff National Park. There are only 2 species of lagomorphs, or members of the rabbit family, that live near the Great Divide: the snowshoe hare and the pika. Snowshoe hares depend on camouflage with their surroundings and also on staying still to avoid predators. They do this from the moment they are born and left alone as a tiny leveret while their mother forages to when they are an adult. Not all are successful, and many hares die. As mentioned earlier, climate change is making it more difficult for snowshoe hares as their annual spring coat change from white to brown and the fall transition from brown to white may be out of sync from when there is snow, especially in the mountain valleys. And this little dead snowshoe hare we found right on the Great Divide Trail in the headwaters of the Old Man River. The American pika has usually all you see are the tracks of snowshoe hare, which have a very distinctive pattern. Okay, now the pika. The American pika has justly earned its nickname of farmer of the mountains. During the summer, a pika will chew off plant stems, collecting a big mouthful of wildflowers and grasses, and then lay them out in little piles on sunny rocks or paths to dry. The sun drying technique ensures the plants don't get moldy. As the plants dry and the pikas add more plants to the pile, they create a haystack. Pikas then move the dry haystacks into their dens deep among the rocks. Pikas are active throughout the entire year. They do not hibernate in the winter, but tend to spend most of their time inside the den in the winter or traveling in tunnels under the snow and rocks. Pikas eat the stored grasses and other plants throughout the winter. They venture out to forage when the weather permits. Their thick coat of fur endows excellent insulation against the cold. Unlike the rabbits, to which they are related, they have short and rounded ears to reduce the risk of frostbite. What they are very vulnerable to is climate change. They cannot tolerate heat and can die when temperatures exceed 25 degrees centigrade. The most common species of small mammal in the vicinity of the GDT is the white-footed mouse or deer mouse, pictured here. It is one of the species of mice that can carry hantavirus, which causes a pulmonary infection. So avoid contact with them, their nests, feces, or urine. The jumping mouse doesn't carry the virus, nor does the northern bog lemming, nor any of the 4 vole species found in the Great Divide area: the southern red-backed vole, the meadow vole, the long-tailed vole, and the water vole. The only picture I have of a vole is one that was caught and partially eaten by a bobcat on a snowy September morning. That is how most of these small rodents end up. They reproduce quickly and produce lots of young. Voles and mice are the base of the food chain and feed everything from garter snakes and birds of prey to mammalian carnivores. Again, you are more likely to see the tracks of mice and voles than to actually observe these creatures when you hike the GDT. The northern bog lemming and most species of voles do not have much in the way of a tail, whereas deer mice and jumping mice do. So that is how you can tell them apart, unless the tracks are of a long-tailed vole, that is. Shrews are exceedingly mobile, high-energy creatures that you might catch a glimpse of as they dash across the GDT. 4 species can be found in Waterton Lakes and Banff National Parks: the masked shrew, vagrant shrew, pygmy shrew, and northern water shrew. But only the first 2 of these can be found in Jasper National Park, the masked and vagrant shrews. And our last mammal species. While camping along the GDT before you turn in for the evening, you may catch a glimpse of a bat at dusk or in the night sky, darting about consuming flying insects, including mosquitoes and other biting flies. Cheer them on. They eat half of their body weight in insects every night. The greatest diversity of bat species along the GDT is in Waterton Lakes National Park, where you might see little brown bats, long-eared bats, big brown bats, long-legged bats, silver-haired bats, hoary bats, and even sometimes eastern red bats. By the time you hike up to Banff, though, it's only possible to see 6 of these species: the long-eared bat, long-legged bat, silver-haired bat, little brown bat, big brown bat, and hoary bat. And in Jasper National Park and further north, the only species you are likely to see are the little brown bat and the silver-haired bat. Fortunately, the dreadful white nose syndrome, which has eliminated bat colonies elsewhere in North America, has not yet been detected in the Canadian Rockies. To wrap up the webinar, I will share a few thoughts on what we can do to appreciate and safeguard nature and in particular, the mammals along the Great Divide Trail. There are many excellent field guides that you can use to identify the flora and fauna of the Canadian Rockies, including the mammals. Due to the weight of field guides, it is best to carry them on short trips, day trips, and to use them to build up your identification skills before going out on the GDT. The nature identification apps are improving, although you cannot always trust the artificial intelligence identifications, especially when you just have evidence of animals such as tracks, scat, or other sign. iNaturalist is very consumptive of iPhone resources, using a lot of data, although there are measures you can take to avoid this. It is a really good idea, though, to download and record your observations, as it improves our collective understanding of which species are where and when. There are also many good field guides to aid in the identification of animal tracks that focus primarily on mammals. They always recommend having a tape measure, as sometimes knowing the size of the track helps determine the species, as in the case of wolverine tracks versus pine marten. There are several websites specializing in tracking, including this naturetracking.com website. Plus, there is also the iTrack Wildlife app, both the light version, which is free but of limited value in the Great Divide area, and the pro version, which is around $20, that might be $20 US a year. There are also a variety of edutaining interpretive programs during the summer in the national and provincial parks through which the GDT travels that you may want to attend before or after your hike. Many of these feature topics on the mammals of the Canadian Rockies. One of the most important things you can do as a GDT hiker to help safeguard nature during your trip is to adhere to no trace backcountry travel principles. Just type in no trace backcountry principles in your browser and read the material under each of the 7 principles before you go. I'm going to elaborate on what respect wildlife entails. Remember, it's their home and you are a visitor. On your way to and from hiking the GDT, be aware that wildlife is often on the roads. Wildlife can decide to cross the road at any time of day, although early morning and late evening are the most common times. You must be particularly careful in the winter when they are drawn to the roads to consume the salt that highway crews use to reduce the likelihood of icy conditions. Do not exceed the posted speed limit and be alert. Parks Canada, provincial government agencies, and non-government organizations have invested millions of dollars in building wildlife underpasses and overpasses, fencing major highways, and warning motorists about the need to drive with care through unfenced areas where wildlife abound. Usually bears try to avoid people. However, if you surprise them or get into their personal space, or if they feel that a food source or their cubs are at potential risk, they will behave aggressively. Read up about how to behave in bear country and do this to avoid conflict with bears, and always adhere to these recommendations. Bears do not tend to attack people in a group of 4 or 5 or more. So that's a good idea if you're hiking on the GDT, but it's not always possible. So stay together if you are in a group of 2 or more. As you walk, talk with your companions. And if you are hiking solo, sing, whistle, name the wildflowers that you see. Periodically whoop, holler, or yell, click your hiking poles together. Bear bells tend not to be as effective as the human voice. Don't play music, as it just makes you less alert, especially if you have earbuds in, then you're not even hearing what's going around you. And it is less effective than talking. Use bear-proof bins, bear pole caches, and rucksacks, or a vehicle if you're car camping, to ensure that you avoid attracting bears with your food and toiletries. Respect when areas are closed due to bear activity. And if a mandatory group size is required by law, it's for your safety and the bear's survival. Be observant and watch out for signs of bears. Be prepared to back off if need be, if, like me, you encounter steaming scat or see a flock of ravens fly off a kill. Keep your pets on a leash and under control. There have been occasions where dogs have run after bears who then turned on them, and if the dog escaped, it brought the angry bear right back to its owners. Carry bear spray and know how to use it. And just a note, I have hiked thousands and thousands of kilometers in bear country over the past 50 years, and I have been charged only once by a bear, a mother grizzly with cubs, while backpacking in the Tornado Pass area of the GDT. You can read about that experience in Chapter 4 of Tales from the Great Divide. Ungulates can be aggressive as well, especially if they get habituated to people and easy food. In the spring and early summer, beware of any doe with a fawn or a cow moose with her calf or yearling, or a bighorn ewe with a lamb, as all of these females will vigilantly defend any perceived threat to their offspring. In the autumn, buck deer, bull elk, and moose, and bighorn rams burst with testosterone, and they can become very aggressive, thrashing young trees and bushes and charging anything that they interpret as a challenge. Mountain goats can be cantankerous anytime. If you feed wildlife, you increase the risk of injury to both yourself and the animal. We saw people feeding this little red fox along the Icefields Parkway, and a week later, we saw it dead on the road. While nowadays this advice may seem obvious in the case of bears, it wasn't that many years ago when people fed bears and watched them in uncovered dumps for entertainment. We now realize how dangerous this is for people and bears. A fed bear is a dead bear, as the saying goes. I also pointed out how getting habituated to people food can cause deer and other ungulates to become aggressive. This habituated mule deer in Waterton Town site tried to get into our car through closed windows when we were stopped at a stop sign because she was so used to being fed out of the windows of cars. The same is true of rodents. I know the ground squirrels look cute, and it is hard to resist feeding them, but don't. The golden mantled ground squirrels, once fed by people, can become extremely persistent and even aggressive. So after that, hikers have to fend them off and secure their food in day packs while trying to eat lunch. People food can actually harm rodent digestive systems and interfere with their metabolism when they are in their winter hibernation or bouts of torpor. Plus, there are several parasites that these rodents potentially carry that you do not want to inadvertently pick up from them. As the saying goes, kindness kills wildness, and it is better to keep the wild in wildlife by not feeding or even approaching them too closely. As you hike the GDT, the chance to observe mammals and other wildlife as they go about their natural lives is a mesmerizing experience. With this privilege comes the responsibility to treat wildlife with the respect they need and deserve. Bring your binoculars or a telephoto lens to capture a picture of a wild animal in its natural environment. Stay at least 30 meters, that's around 3 bus lengths, away from large animals such as deer, moose, and elk, and 100 meters, which is about 10 bus lengths, away from bears, wolves, coyotes, and cougars. Approaching wildlife or allowing wildlife to get too close to you can lead to them no longer being wary of people and puts you, others, and wildlife at risk. That concludes my summary of the mammals of the Great Divide. The next exciting video in the Nature of the Great Divide series is all about berries, seeds, and fall foliage in the vicinity of the Great Divide. If you have any questions, just post them in the YouTube comments along with your contact information, and you will receive an answer. Happy trails.